ASMRk. I hope you are doing well as always. Today's video is another compilation of scary stories from Reddit. Her head tilted, watching the train as it pulled away. That heavy, prickling sensation you only get when someone is watching you. I didn't go closer. Something in me recoiled, like stepping near a live wire. You've already seen me. That means I can come inside. Let's get straight to the first one. I hope you enjoy. I was 24 when this happened. I just moved into a city I didn't really know, living in a rented one-bedroom flat above a bakery. The rent was cheap because the place shook every morning when the delivery truck came, but I didn't care. I had my independence, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't sharing walls with roommates. Most nights I stayed late at the office, not because I loved the job, but because I was trying to make an impression. That meant I usually caught the last train home, somewhere around midnight. The platforms at the hour were never busy. Maybe one or two stragglers, security guards, people too drunk to keep their balance, couples whispering to each other, that kind of thing. But most nights, it was me, the stale smell of coffee from the kiosk, and the low hum of the station lights. This particular night, I remember exactly how the air felt. Cold enough that my breath fogged faintly, but not freezing. I pulled my coat tighter and sat on the wooden bench by the far end of the platform. I didn't hear her arrive. When I looked up, she was just standing there. A woman, maybe in her early 30s, at the opposite end of the platform. She wore a pale coat that reached her calves, her hair pulled back, no bag, no phone, just standing there. Too still, her arms hung loose by her sides, and though she wasn't close, I had the unmistakable sense that her head was angled toward me. I kept glancing at the station clock, trying to avoid staring. But every time I flicked my eyes back, she hadn't moved an inch. No shifting weight, no checking a watch, no small signs of someone waiting for a train. The strange part was that the digital screen above the track still showed my train, just 3 minutes away. And she wasn't on the side going the other direction. She was waiting for the same train as me. I told myself she was probably just tired, maybe in shock, maybe she'd had a rough night. But the longer I sat there, the more her stillness pressed on me. At one point, I pretended to check my phone, holding it up like I was scrolling. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, just the faintest shift of her head, like she'd adjusted her focus toward me. I lowered my phone, my chest tightened. Something about her posture, it was off. She was angled toward the tracks, but her face was toward me. I could feel it. The sound of the train approaching was a relief. The low rumble carried through the tunnel, and the headlights got a sharp white glow against the platform walls. I stood up, adjusting my bag, ready to step closer. That's when she moved. Not toward the edge like everyone does when the train slows. Not toward the doors. She simply pivoted, slow, deliberate, so her whole body was now facing me. Her pale coat shifted enough to show her hands. They were clenched. The train screeched in, brakes screaming against the steel. I stepped forward, eyes darting to the doors as they slid open. A man in a business suit got off, brushing past me, but no one else boarded from that end. I turned my head, and she was gone. Not walked onto the train, not stepped off the platform. Gone. The empty stretch of concrete where she had stood was bare, lit only by the humming of overhead lights. I stood there frozen until the automated announcement repeated itself. Doors closing. I stepped onto the train just before they sealed shut, my pulse hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. The carriage was almost empty, just one older man reading a folded newspaper at the far end. I sat near the middle, clutching my bag against my chest, trying to breathe slowly. As the train lurched forward, I looked out the window back at the platform. For a split second, I saw her, not standing where she had been, but closer, right at the edge of the platform, her head tilted, watching the train as it pulled away. Her pale coat glowed under the harsh station lights, and though we were moving fast, I swear her eyes never left mine. The train carried me into the tunnel. The darkness swallowed her, but that image burnt into my mind. That was 2 years ago. I never saw her again. I still take the train, but I avoid the last one whenever I can. And every time I catch myself staring out of the platform as the doors close, I half expect her to see her there, still waiting. When I first moved into the apartment building, I thought the only thing I'd have to get used to was the noise. The walls were paper thin. I could hear my upstairs neighbour walking around. I could hear the pipes rattle when someone showered. And I could hear conversations bleeding through from the unit next to mine. It wasn't a great place, but it was cheap, and after what I'd been through with my last rental, I didn't care. I just needed somewhere quiet enough to sleep and close enough to the subway to get me to work. The building itself was one of those older concrete blocks that always seemed stuck in the 1970s. Yellowish hallway lights, scuffed beige paint, the smell of damp carpet lingering, no matter how much bleach the janitor used. Most people living there kept to themselves, and I didn't mind. I wasn't looking to make friends anyway. The first time I saw him was on a rainy night. I'd been working late and caught the last train back. By the time I reached my floor, my jacket was soaked through, and the hallway light above the stairwell was flickering and buzzing faintly. That's when I noticed him, a man standing at the far end of the corridor. He wasn't moving, he was just facing the wall, close enough that it looked like he could have been reading something written there. But there was nothing on that wall, no posters, no signs, not even a bulletin board, but just paint. I told myself he was just drunk, or maybe confused, maybe lost. I kept walking, fumbling my keys, trying not to stare. But as I slid the key into my lock, I felt something. That heavy, prickling sensation you only get when someone is watching you. And even though I didn't want to, I turned my head. The man had shifted. His head was turned just enough that one of his convinced myself I'd imagined it. People do strange things in apartment buildings, I told myself. He probably lived on my floor, probably had a reason for being there. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to figure out which apartment he might have come from, but there weren't many doors near where I saw him. The end of the hall was mostly storage rooms and a locked emergency exit. I didn't recall seeing him go into any of those units. That weekend, I bumped into the woman across the hall from me while she was carrying groceries. She was older, maybe in her 50s, and seemed friendly enough. We made small talk. Eventually, I asked, as casually as I could, "Hey, do you know if a guy lives down at the far end of the hall?" Her face changed immediately. She glanced down the corridor before shaking her head quickly. "No one lives down there," she said. "Those storage rooms have been locked up for years." I waited for her to say more, but she didn't. She just carried her bags inside and shut the door with finality, like she hadn't meant to say anything at all. I told myself she must be wrong. Buildings like this always have weird tenants, people who came and went without anyone knowing much about them. But the following week, I saw him again. Same place, same position, standing at the end of the corridor, facing the wall. Only this time, when I turned the key in my door, he didn't just turn his head. He took a step toward me. I stopped leaving my apartment late at night. It wasn't just that I didn't want to see him. It was the way he moved that second time. Slow, deliberate, but with a strange stiffness, like every step cost him effort. He didn't say a word, didn't acknowledge me beyond that single movement, but the sound of his shoes scuffing against the floor echoed down the corridor in a way that felt too loud for such a small action. After that, I started paying attention. Every time I left my apartment, I looked toward the end of the hall. Most days it was empty, but at least once a week he was there, always standing, always facing the wall. I couldn't figure out who he was. He looked normal enough. Short brown hair, an ordinary jacket, dark jeans. He didn't look homeless, and he didn't look like a junkie. If anything, that made it worse. He looked like he could have been anyone. The more I saw him, the more details I noticed. His hands hanging stiffly at his sides, his shoes always wet, even on days it hadn't rained. His eyes, when he finally turned them toward me, blank, flat, unblinking for too long. I tried asking around. No one seemed to know who I was talking about. Some neighbours brushed it off. Others looked uncomfortable, like they didn't even want to have the conversation. The older woman across the hall just shook her head and muttered, "Don't pay him any mind." But it's hard not to pay attention when you realise he only ever appears when you're alone. I didn't plan on confronting him. That wasn't the kind of person I was. But after weeks of sleepless nights, after enough times walking quickly to my door with my heart pounding in my throat, I couldn't take it anymore. It was close to midnight. I'd gone out to grab something from the corner store. When I stepped out of the elevator, the corridor was quiet, empty. I started walking toward my apartment, rehearsing in my head what I'd do if he was there. Pretend to make a phone call, keep my keys in my fist, maybe even tell him to leave me alone. And then I saw him. Not at the end of the hall this time. He was standing directly in front of my apartment door. His face wasn't turned to the wall anymore. He was facing me, head on, arms still stiff at his sides, wet shoes leaving dark marks on the carpet. I froze. For the longest moment, we just stared at each other. His eyes didn't blink, his chest didn't move. He looked less like a person than a figure someone had left behind. Something propped there, just for me to find. I forced myself to take a step forward. My voice came out weak and cracking. Who are you? The man tilted his head slightly, like he was considering the question. Then he turned, slowly, unnaturally, and walked down the corridor toward the storage rooms. I waited until he was out of sight before I rushed into my apartment, locking the door behind me. That was a few weeks ago, and I haven't seen him since. But sometimes when I'm trying to fall asleep, I hear the faint sound of wet shoes on carpet, stopping just outside my apartment door. I'd been driving close to 10 hours when I decided to pull off. The highway had stretched into one long, hypnotic ribbon of dark asphalt, and the dashboard clock had just clicked past midnight. My eyes burned, my back ached. I didn't trust myself to make it the rest of the way without nodding off. The exit I chose wasn't marked on my GPS. The sign just said, services 1 mile, food, gas, lodging. My phone screen was frozen on the rerouting circle, so I figured I'd chance it. The road curved into a stretch of thick trees before spilling out onto a wide, gravelled lot. At the far end sat a low building with a flickering neon sign that read, Cedar Pines Inn. There were only 3 cars parked out front, all older models. Inside, the air smelled faintly of mildew and stale coffee. The lobby was small, just a counter and a pair of vinyl chairs. Behind the desk sat a man in his 50s, overweight, his shirt straining against his stomach. He didn't look up right away. When he finally did, his eyes felt vacant. You want a room? He asked. No small talk, no smile. I slid my card across the counter. He didn't swipe it, he just glanced at it, wrote something down on a ledger, and slid me my key. Not a key card, an actual metal key, with a tarnished brass tag stamped Room 6. The hallway smelled worse than the lobby. A heavy, damp odour, like carpet that had never really dried after a flood. Room 6 was at the very end. The door stuck before it opened, and I had to lean hard into it with my shoulder to force it open. Inside, the air was stale, as though nobody had cracked a window in months. There was one bed sagging in the middle, a nightstand with a lamp that didn't work, a dresser with no drawers. The curtains were drawn tight, but I could see the faint outline of trees outside. I was too tired to care. I dropped my bag by the door and collapsed on the mattress, telling myself I just needed a few hours before getting back out on the road. That's when I noticed it, the faint sound of a television. It wasn't coming from the room next door. It was muffled, low, but it was inside the walls. I woke a few hours later with my throat dry. The television sound was still there, the same low murmur of voices, just on the edge of understanding. I stepped into the hallway. The carpet squished under my feet as if waterlogged. The lights overhead buzzed faintly, though every other bulb was burned out. Halfway down the corridor, I stopped. Room 4's door was open, just a crack. Not wide enough to see inside, but wide enough to catch the faint flicker of light. I should have kept walking, but I pushed the door slowly. The room was empty. No luggage, no personal belongings. Just a bed frame with no mattress and a TV sitting on the floor, screen black. The light was coming from something else, a glow leaking from the bathroom. I didn't go closer. Something in me recoiled, like stepping near a live wire. I backed out, closed the door gently, and hurried back into my own room. But when I slipped the key into the lock, the door opened before I touched it. The bed was different. The sheets had been pulled tight, the blanket smoothed as if made up by staff. My bag was gone. On the nightstand, something sat that hadn't been there before. A key, this one stamped, room 9. The sound of the television was louder now, clear enough that I caught words, though distorted. A woman's voice, flat, repeating the same sentence again and again. I backed into the hall. The desk clock was gone. The ledger on the counter was open. Names scrawled in uneven handwriting. Most had been crossed out. All except the last line. My name, room 9. I didn't stay to check it. I didn't ask questions. I didn't sleep until I made it 3 towns away. When I finally pulled into another motel, my bag was sitting on the passenger seat beside me, though I don't remember carrying it out. When I was in college, I had a professor who taught local history. He was an older man, eccentric but respected, the type who remembered every name, every date, every tiny story that never made it into textbooks. Toward the end of the semester, he invited a handful of students to help him with what he called a private project. He lived just outside of town, in an old house I'd driven past but never entered. The place wasn't haunted looking, not in the obvious sense. It was clean, well kept, with the tall hedges and narrow windows. But the moment I stepped inside, I had the distinct impression that every wall carried weight to it, like the house was tired of standing. He led us into a study lined with shelves. The project was simple, cataloguing boxes of letters, diaries, and photographs he'd collected over the years. Some were donations, others, he admitted, he'd purchased at estate events. We were told to transcribe them into a database. Easy work, quiet work, and it paid. I should have walked away the night I read the first letter. At first, the letters were harmless. Soldiers writing home, grocery lists from the 1920s, postcards from summer vacations. But as the weeks went on, the tone shifted. One box, unlabelled, contained nothing but short notes on yellowed paper. None were signed, none had dates. The handwriting was inconsistent as well, as if several people had written them. They all described the same thing. I see him outside again. He's waiting. He never comes to the door, but he wants me to notice. He smiled tonight. I don't know what to do. The professor didn't explain the context. When small towns embellished their fears. But I wasn't convinced. One night, while everyone else was packed up, I stayed late to finish typing. When the professor stepped out the room, I unfolded another note at the bottom of the stack. The ink was smeared, as though written in a hurry. If you're reading this, don't let him see you. That was the first time I noticed how oppressive the house was after dark. The hedges outside blocked most of the streetlights, leaving the windows black and reflective. As I worked, I felt it. Not sound, not movement, just the growing pressure of being observed. The letters started getting under my skin. Every mention of him felt less like a character in someone else's story, and more like a warning meant for whoever held the page. By the third week, I developed a routine. I only worked in the study. I kept my back to the wall, and I never, ever looked at the windows. Until the night I broke the rule. It was past midnight, and everyone else had gone home. I told myself I'd only type one more entry. But when I turned to put the letter back in its box, my eyes flicked toward the glass. At first, I thought it was my reflection. But then it smiled, and I wasn't smiling. I froze. By the time I blinked, the glass was empty again. I shoved everything into the box and left, telling the professor I wasn't feeling too well. I didn't go back for a week. When I finally returned, the study was empty, except for one box placed deliberately in the centre of the table. It was the same one with the notes, but now there was only a single letter inside. The handwriting was neat this time, deliberate. It read, "You've already seen me. That means I can come inside." I asked the professor about it, but he swore he hadn't left the box there. He told me I must have misremembered, that maybe I'd moved it myself. But I know what I saw, and I know what I read. That was 2 years ago. I don't live in that town anymore, but I kept the letter, not because I wanted to, but because when I tried to throw it away, it turned up in my backpack the next morning. So that is the last story for today. I hope you enjoyed them. Let me know down in the comments what your favourite story was. Until next time, take care.